Good morning, Mr. President. We'd like to welcome you warmly to the Pan-African Youth Conference. My name is Anne Mazamhaka, and I will be moderating the session this morning. You may have a seat. We're going to begin the session with a recap of what we have been discussing, and then we will have some opening remarks from the Minister of Youth and Chair of the Conference of Youth Ministers in Africa from Congo-Brazzaville. And then we will give the floor to you for your own remarks. Just to begin, this conference was organized by Umurinzi, which is an association of young Rwandan professionals, and by Leo Africa Forum, which was launched last evening. The themes we discussed yesterday in general were leadership and regional integration, good governance and infrastructure and sustainability. And the goal of this forum is to come up with solutions and recommendations and resolutions, a way forward. Yesterday, we discussed liberation movements and noted that they were characterized by courage, sacrifice, and dignity. And we talked about what ideas and ideals fuel the youth of today, what inspires us to action. It was noted that change can only come through inspired and transformative leadership. We discussed what we learned from liberation movements and noted that liberation movements were not short-term wins, and they took not only courage and sacrifice, but hard work, taking responsibility, and challenging the status quo. We discussed our current challenges in Africa today, and those were very long discussions, but a couple of things that stood out were we seem to be chasing development paradigms from elsewhere and comparing ourselves to other countries and continents, and not taking into account our own particular contexts. We also seem to be focusing on progress and prosperity, but there's a danger that if we focus on those, we will not address issues of inequity, inclusivity, marginalization, and divisiveness. We talked about what we need to do as youth. One of our colleagues mentioned that we need to stop playing the ABC game, accusing, blaming, and complaining. And instead of this, we need to seize opportunities and to act. We need to be implementers and not talkers. We need to be our brother and sister's keeper. We need to develop generational partnerships through open dialogue between generations. We need to strive for excellence and defy expectations by not taking shortcuts. And we need to criticize by creating solutions. We need to innovate through homegrown solutions, find ways to own and finance our solutions, be accountable and responsible citizens, and foster and promote inclusivity through dialogue. And one of our delegates came up with a term that we need to change our software, which is change our mindset. And we need to do this at an early age, starting at an early age. Encourage critical thinking so that we can create leaders that are accountable owners of this continent and therefore invested in its future. So that's just a small recap of what we discussed yesterday. At this time, I would like to call once again on the Honorable Minister of Youth from Congo-Brazzaville, Minister Anatole Makoso, for his opening remarks.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président de la République, Monsieur le Ministre, chers collègues, distingués invités, Mwaramutse, Jambo, Habari, Mbolo, Mbete. Je voudrais Avant tout propos, Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, vous remercier d'avoir fait le déplacement pour échanger avec ces jeunes. Remercier aussi le peuple frère rwandais, le gouvernement et bien entendu son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, pour nous avoir associés à cette célébration. Et surtout l'accueil et les marques d'attention dont ma délégation et moi-même avons fait l'objet depuis notre arrivée. L'occasion nous est donnée ici de rendre hommage à la jeunesse rwandaise, Excellence, Monsieur le Président, qui, grâce au leadership du président Paul Kagame, s'est résolument investi dans la reconstruction du Rwanda et a montré au monde entier sa capacité de dépassement qui a permis l'embellie de la ville capitale, Kigali, une ville en voie d'émergence. Dans le cadre de la célébration du 20e anniversaire de la libération du Rwanda, le gouvernement rwandais a choisi une thématique très révélatrice. Cette thématique, je cite, « Au-delà des mouvements de libération, forgeons notre avenir ». Cette problématique s'inscrit dans la perspective du devenir de la jeunesse, non pas seulement de la jeunesse rwandaise, mais de l'ensemble de la jeunesse africaine, en vue de son affirmation dans l'optique de la croissance et du développement durable. On en veut pour preuve, Excellence, Monsieur le Président, la présence à ces assises de la jeunesse de tous les pays du continent. Nous en avons compté plus d'une quinzaine ici représentés. La jeunesse rwandaise, en conviant ses pairs, jeunes du continent à cette assise, a donc réussi un grand pari. Un pari qui permet de définir l'identité de la jeunesse africaine. Une jeunesse au rendez-vous des défis pour un mieux-être collectif. En le faisant, Excellence, Monsieur le Président, cette jeunesse vous fait un appel réitéré à une véritable intégration africaine. Cette intégration qui traîne ou qui marque le pas. Dans le souci de créer les conditions d'une dynamique entre les Rwandais et la jeunesse africaine, ou de susciter l'adhésion populaire de l'ensemble du continent dans l'irréversible processus de développement, le gouvernement rwandais s'est appuyé sur ce qu'avaient été à l'origine les mouvements de libération en Afrique. Il a voulu simplement rappeler au travers de ce thème le degré de ferveur avec laquelle les pionniers des mouvements de libération se sont investis par l'action orientée par ces pères de l'indépendance. C'est ainsi que ceux-ci se sont forgés une identité, ces pères de l'indépendance. À l'époque, ils étaient tous jeunes. C'était une jeunesse chevillée aux ambitions d'être au centre de l'action multiforme, et cela en vue de la construction d'une Afrique libre. Libre, oui, mais totalement libérée de toutes les dépendances. Nous disons de toutes les dépendances. Dépendance politique, dépendance économique, mais aussi dépendance culturelle. Seulement, la liberté politique acquise des mouvements de libération, gage de la gestion du pouvoir politique par les politiques africains eux-mêmes, a failli être compromise du fait du mode de gestion de la chose publique, avec parfois des types d'idéologies à base tribale, excluant les autres ethnies ou les autres sensibilités, et ramenant la gestion des affaires du peuple à ce qu'on pouvait appeler une tribu-classe, parfois une poignée d'individus, Monsieur le Président. Cette pratique politique a fortement déséquilibré la majorité des pays qui ont pu arracher au prix d'autant de souffrances et de sacrifices l'indépendance pour permettre une gestion partagée du pouvoir politique. L'Afrique est donc passée des mouvements de libération nationale au mouvement de libération révolutionnaire nationaliste, puis au mouvement de démocratisation pluraliste qui nous permet aujourd'hui de nous hisser au rang des États modernes sans complexe. Mais au-delà de ces luttes de libération, Monsieur le Président, d'autres défis non moins importants restent à relever et devraient interpeller la conscience africaine. Permettez-moi, Monsieur le Président, j'ai souvent le mauvais rôle quand je prends la parole. Parce que, ministre en charge de la jeunesse, président de la conférence des ministres en charge de l'Union africaine, en charge de la jeunesse, je n'ai pas de côté. Quand je suis avec les jeunes, ils me disent que je ne suis plus jeune. Et je travaille avec les dirigeants, donc je ne peux pas être avec eux. Quand je viens chez les dirigeants, chez les aînés, ils disent, bon, toi tu passes ton temps à défendre les causes des jeunes. Tu vas donc du côté de la jeunesse. Du coup, je me retrouve sans parti. Alors, je tenais quand même profiter de cette occasion pour dire à vous ce que nous avons à vous dire et aux jeunes ce que vous avez à leur dire. Parce que, Monsieur le Président, après les luttes de libération, d'autres défis s'imposent à l'Afrique. Et ces défis vont être relevés par ces jeunes qui sont appelés à nous succéder. Il faut donc que nous ayons ensemble une parfaite connaissance de ces défis. Il s'agit des défis sécuritaires, avec la montée du terrorisme presque au cœur de l'Afrique, déstabilisant ainsi notre continent. Il s'agit des défis économiques, avec la convoitise que suscite l'exploitation de nos richesses, avec les autres puissances qui ont épuisé toutes leurs ressources et qui ne constituent plus dans leur continent un vrai marché, qui trouvent que l'Afrique est le marché des siècles futurs. Mais aussi avec les défis, c'est le défi culturel et institutionnel, avec les ingérences et les injonctions de toute nature, au point de vouloir imposer à l'Afrique la négation de son identité culturelle et morale. Les nouvelles formes de lutte, c'est gagner cette bataille, Monsieur le Président, comme vous avez gagné les premières batailles quand vous fûtes jeune. Et la lutte des générations actuelles pour l'indépendance et la libération intégrale de l'Afrique, c'est ce que je me permets tous les jours de dire aux jeunes et que je voudrais rappeler aujourd'hui au regard de leur discussion d'hier, commence par la libération contre les idées reçues et préconçues qui sont véhiculées par le discours de nos partenaires. C'est quoi ces idées? Et nous les avons encore entendues ici. Il n'y a pas de démocratie en Afrique. L'Afrique, c'est le continent de la dictature. C'est quoi ces idées? Les dirigeants ne font rien contre le chômage des jeunes. Les idées, c'est lesquelles? Les jeunes sont exclus des instances de prise de décision. Ces idées, c'est lesquelles? Nous avons besoin des institutions fortes et non des hommes forts. Ces idées, c'est lesquelles? Il faut à tout prix obtenir l'alternance générationnelle. Telles sont, quelque peu résumées, les revendications de ces jeunes, mais qu'ils tiennent aussi en grande partie de la culture extérieure, de l'influence extérieure. C'est à ces préoccupations que je me dois de répondre en votre nom, Monsieur le Président. Et je sais que vous aurez des mots plus convaincants que les miens. Mais je me permets simplement de faire cette anticipation. La démocratie est une culture que chaque peuple forge en fonction de son histoire. Ça, c'est pour répondre à la première préoccupation. Si elle est une valeur universelle, elle ne s'applique pas de la même manière dans tous les pays, même en Occident. Chaque pays a sa spécificité. Mon président, Denis Sassou Nguesso, nous disait un jour que, je veux le citer, la démocratie est d'abord une culture africaine. Elle a toujours existé en Afrique. La palabre en est l'expression la plus courante qui interdit aux chefs de décider seuls. Quand les problèmes surgissaient et quand une partie n'était pas d'accord, elle allait discuter à l'extérieur, puis revenait en séance plénière pour exposer ses arguments. La discussion reprenait et l'on aboutissait toujours à une conclusion adoptée par consensus. Lorsque certains choix étaient particulièrement difficiles à faire, on les remettait au lendemain, le temps de demander discrètement l'avis des femmes. Ainsi fonctionnait la démocratie dans les communautés africaines. Vous voyez, Monsieur le Président, chers jeunes, que lorsqu'on nous parle aujourd'hui de l'intégration de la femme dans le processus de développement, on peut dire que l'Afrique était en avance. Parce que lorsque les hommes n'arrivaient pas à s'accorder, ils repartaient demander l'avis des femmes, pour que les femmes, qui sont le symbole de la douceur, de l'unité, de la concorde, de l'amour, puissent leur donner la marche à suivre. Deuxièmement, s'agissant de la lutte contre le chômage des jeunes, Monsieur le Président, il faut faire comprendre aux jeunes que ce problème du chômage n'est pas propre à l'Afrique. L'Occident lui-même est confronté à ce problème à un point insoupçonné. Et que vous, chef d'État, vous en avez pris la mesure depuis bientôt plus d'une décennie. Je n'en veux pour preuve que le sommet de Ouagadougou. Je n'en veux pour de 2004. Je n'en veux pour preuve que le sommet de Malabo, où vous avez inauguré le dialogue intergénérationnel au sein de l'Union africaine. Et parlant de ce sommet de Ouagadougou, vous allez vous retrouver encore en octobre pour faire le point de Ouaga plus 10 afin d'évaluer les avancées réalisées dans la mise en œuvre de la déclaration sur l'emploi et la lutte contre la pauvreté. Monsieur le Président, troisièmement, les jeunes disent qu'ils sont exclus des instances de prise de décision. Pourtant, dans tous les mouvements de lutte, c'est les jeunes qui sont à l'avant-garde. Et vous y avez répondu, Monsieur le Président. Lorsque, conscients de cette place qu'occupent les jeunes dans le développement de l'humanité et du continent, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Union africaine ont adopté en 2006 la Charte africaine de la jeunesse. Je peux vous dire que c'est le premier et le seul instrument international. Aucun autre continent n'a mis en place une charte de la jeunesse. Et au travers de cette charte, vous rappelez les obligations des États en matière d'autonomisation et de leadership des jeunes. Dans cette même optique, l'Union africaine s'était employée à redynamiser l'Union panafricaine de la jeunesse, plateforme de coordination et d'action entre toutes les couches de la jeunesse africaine, et de susciter la mise en place dans chaque pays d'un Conseil national de la jeunesse en vue d'une forte implication des jeunes dans les processus de prise de décision. C'est une avancée qu'il vous faut vous reconnaître, Monsieur le Président. Enfin, s'agissant des institutions fortes, qu'on nous chante tout le temps, bien entendu que l'Afrique a besoin des institutions fortes. Mais je rappelle que ces institutions ne valent que ce que valent les hommes. Et que même lorsque nous aurons établi ces institutions fortes, il faut que nous procédions à un véritable changement des mentalités. Cela a été reconnu ici par les jeunes. Parce que tous les hommes, toutes les générations ont les mêmes passions, ont les mêmes besoins, ont les mêmes sensibilités. Et puisqu'on nous demande d'établir des institutions fortes, la perche nous est donc tendue de revoir nos institutions et notre pratique de la démocratie, qui ne semble pas prendre suffisamment en compte les réalités sociales et culturelles de nos peuples, Monsieur le Président. Les institutions africaines doivent prendre en compte nos valeurs traditionnelles. Monsieur le Président Paul Kagame nous le rappelait hier. Nos valeurs traditionnelles africaines, assises sur le partage, le dialogue, le consensus, le respect et la place de l'ancien, et l'initiation intergénérationnelle. Ces valeurs sont propres à l'Afrique. Ces valeurs doivent être vécues par l'ensemble des Africains, non pas comme de simples slogans, mais des fondements culturels qu'il convient de traduire dans nos constitutions au travers d'un mode clair de dévolution et d'exercice du pouvoir. C'est dire qu'au regard des nouveaux défis et des nouvelles luttes que les générations actuelles devront livrer, il nous faut nous engager dans d'importantes réformes institutionnelles, avec les constitutions normatives et non normalistes et mimétiques. Des institutions qui intégreraient et traduiraient dans les faits les ressources culturelles africaines, aux fins de permettre à la principale ressource humaine africaine, qu'est la jeunesse, de mieux gérer et de capitaliser les dividendes et les ressources naturelles. Il s'agit donc de garantir un meilleur partage du pouvoir, Monsieur le Président, au travers d'une gouvernance intergénérationnelle, une remise en cause du principe de la gestion du pouvoir par le seul vainqueur, qui fait que celui qui gagne le pouvoir à une élection s'approprie, s'arroge tous les postes de responsabilité et exclut celui qui a perdu. Ça, c'est contraire à notre pratique africaine assise sur le partage. Il nous faut redéfinir le rôle à faire jouer aux anciens dirigeants qui auraient perdu loyalement leurs élections et faire une forte implication au pouvoir moral assuré par nos leaders communautaires, traditionnels et religieux. Vous avez donc, Monsieur le Président, votre génération a l'obligation morale d'engager ces importantes réformes au cours de cette décennie pour laisser aux générations futures une Afrique forte. Pour terminer, Monsieur le Président, je voudrais, avec votre permission, vous demander, en dehors des questions qui vous seront posées par les jeunes, à titre personnel, si c'est vous qui avez inspiré le président Obama à convoquer un sommet États-Unis-Afrique en août prochain. Parce qu'en août 2012, recevant le sénateur américain Tim Walber de l'État du Michigan, vous avez exigé un sommet américano-africain pour mettre au point des moyens d'explorer le taux croissant de la consommation de l'Afrique qui est sur le déclin dans les économies occidentales. Vous avez dit que le président de la Commission de l'Union africaine pourrait collaborer avec les États-Unis pour organiser le sommet afin que l'Amérique et l'Afrique puissent discuter des questions relatives à la stimulation du marché et de la consommation, ainsi que de stimuler les aspects de l'entrepreneuriat, surtout de l'entrepreneuriat des jeunes. Monsieur le Président, vous nous répondrez si c'est vous. Et nous attendons simplement, Monsieur le Président, que vous puissiez nous dire quelle aura été la position commune de l'Union africaine par rapport à cette rencontre qui s'annonce. Très respectueusement, Monsieur le Président, Mourako Zetchami.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, it is an honor to have you here today. We're all very grateful and excited to interact with you. At this time, if you'd like to take the podium and make your opening remarks.
The chairperson of the forum. What's your name?
Anne Mazimaka.
Mazimpaka.
Yes.
That's very simple. the honorable ministers and the delegates. I don't know the theme of the conference. You said the theme was Beyond Liberation Movement. That's what you said?
Beyond liberation movements shaping our future.
Okay. But it doesn't matter from which angle I tackle this subject, because it is a subject which I know well. Two years ago, Uganda was celebrating 50 years of independence. On that occasion, I gave what they called a Jubilee lecture, meaning 50 years of Uganda's independence. Now, in that lecture, which was captured in a small booklet here, I identified what I called 10 strategic bottlenecks. Now, what you are talking about are some of the bottlenecks. But the bottlenecks which I have identified are 10. Now, I will not go through them, all of them, today because it will take a long time, but they are in this booklet. And I think it addresses that question of what needs to be done after liberation. But before I talk about the 10 bottlenecks, there is a process in biology. It is called metamorphosis. This is a process where insects metamorphose from one form of life to another one, from egg to caterpillar to pupa to mature butterfly, in the case of butterflies. But other insects also metamorphose in different ways. In the same way, all of you must know that society, if it is to remain healthy, must metamorphose. Europe has metamorphosed. If, for instance, you go to the time of the French Revolution, 1789, which some of you must have studied, you will see that at that time, France and Europe was divided into 4 social classes. Class number 1 were the feudalists. Feudalists is a social group who live in a certain way and are sustained by taking rent from the tenants. That's how the feudalists live. The feudalists lived by taking rent from the peasants who were staying on their land. Then the second group were, in the French language, they were calling them the bourgeoisie, or the middle class. Now, the middle class, we are living on different diet. They were being sustained by profit. Profit is the difference between the cost of a product, what it takes you to produce a product, and the price at which you sell that product. The difference is called profit. Now, the bourgeoisie live on profits. If they don't make profits, they will decline as bourgeoisie and become something else. Now, at that time, the third class, which was emerging, was the industrial working class. In the French language, they were called the proletariat. Those ones depended on wages. They don't depend on profit because they are not owners of means of production, but they depend on selling their labor and being paid for that labor. Then the final group were the peasants. These were the people who were on the land, and those ones depended on their sweat minus what the landlords took. That's how the society was organized in France in 1789. If you go to France now, you will not find some of those groups there. They are no longer there. The feudalists are no longer there. The peasants are no longer there. The society has metamorphosed. The French society is now comprised of the middle class and the skilled working class. That is the metamorphosis that has taken place in Europe. Now, the problem of Africa, which you must address, I hope when you talk of preserving culture, you also do not include preserving the peasants. Because if that's what you are talking about, then you need to rethink what you are talking about. So therefore, the society must metamorphose. But what the minister was saying, the process of metamorphosis must be done independently, not depending on exactly how the other one did it, you must all do it in the same way. No. The metamorphosis must be there, but it should be done independently according to the concrete conditions of each society. But the metamorphosis must be there. Because sometimes there's confusion on that. Some people think that preserving means preserving underdevelopment. No, the society must change so that we have a new modern structure of society. Now, coming back to the strategic bottlenecks, the first one, which I pointed out in this booklet, was ideological disorientation. In your presentation of yesterday by Ms. Mazimpaka, you pointed out that there should be a generational partnership. That's ordinary common sense. That the old must cooperate with the young and the young must cooperate with the old. And you have avoided what I've been observing in some of the meetings in the African Union. Some of the youth have been confusing biology with ideology. You hear them saying, we are young, we are young, we are young, we are young. Okay, you are young, so what? You may be young biologically, but old ideologically. So what use will you do for us? Because you can have a young person with archaic ideas, with ideas which are totally out of fashion. So it's not, yes, the biology is there, because of course you have got a longer time to stay here on Earth, the old men and women will go to heaven much faster than you. That is if you look after yourself very well. But the ideas are ideas. If you have got wrong ideas, whether you are young or old, they are wrong ideas. If you have got right ideas, it doesn't matter whether you are young or old, they are useful ideas. Now, the minister from Brazzaville talked of the chaos in some parts of the continent, the wars, the terrorism. Wars are divided in two categories. Some wars are described as just wars. You cannot stand and say all wars are bad. No, some of the wars are just wars. They are justified. Like the anti-colonial wars. These were justified wars. We had no alternative but to fight. Because the Europeans had come here and colonized us. And they colonized us because of our internal weaknesses. That's also another topic for another day. They were able to conquer us because of our internal weaknesses. But eventually, we had to throw them out. Therefore, those wars were just wars. But they are also unjust wars. Unjust wars are two types. One type are wars of aggression. Like when the Europeans came to attack us here, what were they looking for? What legitimate reason were they looking for? Maybe they were looking for something, but it was something not legitimate. You can look for something which you should not be looking for. If they wanted natural resources to use, they should have come in order to trade. They should have come to our chiefs and say, okay, can we buy minerals from you? Instead of coming to grab. So the colonial wars were unjust wars, were wars of aggression. Now, if they are not colonial wars, but they are wars, for instance, tribal wars, how do you characterize those wars? Those are criminal wars, because they are not wars which are for legitimate reasons, and they shouldn't be there. But those criminal wars are propelled by a wrong ideology, a pseudo-ideology. This word pseudo, is it originally French or what? Is it there in French? Pseudo. P-S-E-U-D-O. Français? Huh? It's originally French. So, they are propelled by pseudo-ideology, a misdefinition of issues, a misdiagnosis of issues. How is one tribe in conflict with another tribe? If you study carefully, even before colonialism, the African tribes were, you find normally they specialize. Like here in this part of Africa, the tribes which are living in the forest, like the Congo forest, they would specialize in certain activities. like the ones in Congo would specialize in copper products. They would make products called emiringa. I think emiringa was a combination of copper and something else, like brass, type of brass. They concentrate on animal products from the forest. And then the tribes from the savannah, who are mainly growing crops and also keeping cows, they would concentrate on agricultural products. And then the two would exchange. And you would find that they would really depend on each other, especially at a low level of technology. It was not possible to do hunting and at the same time do agriculture, and at the same time, you couldn't manage. It was good that one specializes in something and the other one in something else, and then you exchange. That was the political economy of this area at that time. Therefore, the chiefs who were encouraging wars that time were wrong, because they were really interfering with the interests of the people. The people should have been left to trade, and the chiefs should have facilitated that. But some of them were not doing that. Instead, they were creating conflict. And it's that conflict that the colonialists exploited. Today, again, you find specializations of these different groups. Like my tribe in Uganda, they are mainly cattle keepers. They also grow crops like coffee, tea, bananas, and so on. Now you find that all the people in the area are doing the same activities. I keep cows, my neighbor keeps cows. I grow coffee, my neighbor grows coffee. I grow bananas, my neighbor grows bananas. Now, my neighbor cannot buy from me because I've got similar products, and I cannot buy from him. So we are stuck. If you leave us alone, we shall die of poverty. So, who helps us? The people of Kampala. They're the ones who buy our milk, who buy our beef, who buy, they don't buy much coffee. The coffee is bought by the international community, we export it. Now, if somebody comes and says, and tries to organize us to form a tribe organization, we form our tribe organization. Whose interest is he serving? Is he serving our interests? Because if we listen to him, we shall be acting against our own interests. Because our interests are that people from my region work with the people of Uganda to sell their products. Not only work with the people of Kampala, but also work with the people in Kigali. Because if you come to Kigali here, you will find products from Uganda here. Bananas and so on. South Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, Eastern Congo. Now, those people who promote sectarianism, in whose interests are they doing it? Is it in the interest of the people, or is it in their own interest? So this is problem number one. And many of those wars you are talking about, part of the paralysis, part of the chaos is caused by this misdefinition of people's interests. Now, another strategic bottleneck, which we identified in this booklet, is the human resource development, education, and skills. This was part of the problem in the past. Our people were not educated during the colonial times. But now, African governments have paid more attention to education. The only question is, what type of education? It must be education that gives scientific skills, gives technical skills, gives managerial skills, and also some skills of understanding society, like social sciences. But the question is the proportion. If you have got too many people who just know when Napoleon invaded Russia, and there are too many of those, that will not help us to develop our country. Yes, we should have a few historians who know when Napoleon invaded Russia and how he failed and where he stood and what he said. But we should have more people who know about science, about skills, about management skills. That has been another bottleneck. But fortunately, many African governments are now addressing that. Two more of the 10 bottlenecks which I would like to talk about now. Number one is what you touched on, the market. I've also touched on it already when I was talking about point number one. Our economies cannot grow, our businesses cannot grow if we do not have sufficiently big markets to buy what is produced in the factories. Therefore, our leaders were right from 1980 when they met in, I think it was Lagos, the Lagos Plan of Action, where they said we must integrate the African markets. That's how we formed these COMESA, ECOWAS, the market of Central Africa, and so on, and SADC later on. Now, that's very crucial. Because if we do not have a sufficiently big market, we cannot sell sufficiently, our enterprises cannot sell sufficiently, and if they don't sell sufficiently, they will not make profit, they will not expand, they will not create jobs. That employment you are talking about, the youth employment, must be linked with the expansion of the enterprises so that they can be able to create jobs. Yes, there is some unemployment in Europe, but our unemployment is more massive because even the ones who think they are employed, many of them are in what we call disguised unemployment. You find a lot of people in the villages, the grandfather is there, the father is there, the son is there, the grandson is there, they are all just there in the village, in 3 acres of land. And yet, those 3 acres just need 2 people to work on them. So the other 50 are redundant. This is what we mean by underdevelopment. Underdevelopment means underutilization of resources. If you have got 200 people in 1 acre, they are not fully utilized. We should leave a few people here to work these 3 acres, then the rest can go and do something else that will create more wealth. And remember, wealth is also measured. Like the same way as we measure weight, wealth is also measured. And we measure it by the measurement of GDP, gross domestic product, or GNP. If you look at the GDP of the African countries, they are small. Many of them are small. I think the biggest now they say is Nigeria. They have recalibrated and said Nigeria is now $500 billion. But a small country like South Korea is $1 trillion. size of GDP. So the GDPs of the African economies countries are small because the factors of production are not fully utilized. The human resource is underutilized, the land for agriculture is underutilized, the minerals are underutilized, everything is producing below capacity. That's what we mean by underutilization. And that's why, therefore, you have got this social disequilibria. So many people without full-time work. That's why you can find in the villages in Uganda, somebody can just come and he comes to visit. What have you come to do? Say, I've come to see you. And just sits there for 3 weeks, eating, sleeping, because he has nothing. He's unemployed, and meanwhile he's eating. Now, this is irrational organization of society. Development, among other things, involves rationalization of the way society is organized. Remove the irrationalities, increase the rationalities. Now, the final point I would like to talk about, so therefore, market integration is a very important stimulus for economic growth, and therefore the solving of all these problems you are talking about, employment, what have you, the expanding the revenue base, independence. How do you get independent? You get independent by the government getting enough revenue. How do you get enough revenue? You get enough revenue by having enough items to tax. And how do you get enough items to tax? By expanding the tax base. And how do you expand the tax base? By expanding production. It is all linked. Now, finally, I would like to talk on infrastructure. For today, the other points are here in this booklet. If these people have got enough copies, or they can give it to the organizer, then they can multiply them. Infrastructure. Now, what is amazing about infrastructure is the lack of knowledge by the African civil servants especially. I think the civil servants are the biggest problem in Africa. Because civil servants are the ones who stay for long. These politicians come and go. So it should be the civil servants who should know what is required. There is a measurement called kilowatt hour per capita. Kilowatt hour per capita. That is the amount of electricity per person in society. If you go on the internet, you can get these figures. Kilowatt hour per capita. You go and look at it, you the youth. So that in addition to your biology, you also add ideas. If you go on the internet, you find that almost all the African countries, as of today, except for South Africa and Libya, before Gaddafi was killed by the Europeans, all these other African countries have got very low levels of kilowatt hour per capita. The United States has got a kilowatt hour per capita of about, I think it's like 14,000. Some of the African countries have got as low as 12. United States, 14,000. Some of the African countries have got as low as 12. Now, there's no way you can go beyond liberation, your theme, if you do not deal with the issue of electricity. Because electricity means factories, factories means more wealth, more production, more jobs. Now, if you don't deal with that, you are not going to go far. The African economies have been growing. It is true they have been growing. They have no alternative but to grow, because if you have been at sea level, you must come up. And they have been growing fast, some of them. Like Uganda has been growing quite fast for these years. But before we solve the problem of electricity, the economy was growing all right, but growing in sectors that do not need electricity, like hair salons. You find so many hair salons in Kampala. They shape the hair this way of the women, then they shape it that way, then they twist it. Okay, that is growth, but it does not employ a lot of people. How many people are in the hair salon? There are maybe 5, 6 restaurants, things like transport, many minibuses. The whole of Kampala is full of them. Okay, that's growth, but it's not growth which is creating jobs. Real estate, a lot of houses. But the sectors which create jobs, which is what you are talking about, is manufacturing. If you look at a textile industry, how many people does it employ? It would employ definitely more people. These are the issues you should go into, you the youth. Which are the sectors that will create more jobs? Manufacturing versus services. China is able to employ those millions because of manufacturing, not because of hair salons and a few restaurants and casinos and all this. Now, that is electricity. So the electricity must be, and also, when you hear these African technocrats speaking, you feel embarrassed, because you can see they don't know what they are talking about. They say, there's a lot of potential of electricity in Africa. Where is the potential? The hydro power potential in Africa is not much. The total, if you take all the rivers of Africa, the total potential is about 350,000 megawatts. If you take the Congo has got the biggest, Congo, Kinshasa. And Ethiopia is the next. The rest is not so much, but the total is about 350,000 megawatts from hydro. But the United States alone uses 1 million megawatts of electricity. So when you hear Africans talking about the big potential of hydro, you know they don't know what they are talking about, because they don't know what is required. But there are other sources of energy. There is the coal. It's not clean energy, but it's there. Nuclear energy. Fortunately, we have got a lot of uranium. That's a much bigger source of potential electricity than hydro. And later on, if solar energy becomes cheap, solar energy, of course, is the best form of energy, but it is still expensive. That is still a problem. Now, finally, on the issue of infrastructure, you look at the railway and the roads. Africa, we don't have linkage from east to west, from south to north. No linkage. The only linkage you have now is by air. But air is very expensive. You cannot transport a lot of goods by air. So that's why in East Africa, we are now working together to see how we can solve the problem of infrastructure. And when you solve the problem of infrastructure, what happens? You have lower costs of electricity, lower costs of transport, and therefore the business people can do business better. Because if the transport costs are high, electricity costs are high, the business people will not be able to make profit because the costs are too high. And if they don't make profit, their businesses cannot expand. And if their business cannot expand, they cannot employ you the youth, the youth who want jobs. So electricity means jobs for the youth. Railway means jobs for the youth. The roads are good, of course, but they are not as efficient in cutting costs as the railway. The youth movement should be the one on the forefront fighting for these points I'm talking about. But sometimes you find the youth, like in Uganda, I sometimes see the youth opposing some of these projects. They don't know that they are committing suicide without knowing it. With these few words, I thank you for inviting me. I speak a lot. If you invite me, you do so at your own risk. So I better restrain myself and end here. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. So in the interest of time, I'm going to begin by going to the floor. Would anyone like to ask a question? Okay. Please remember that we have about 20 minutes left. One question, not two. If it's a comment, make it one comment and make it brief. Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My name is Cyrus Musi from Rwanda. As an African, my question is, what is the relationship between liberation and Pan-Africanism? Thank you.
Sure. Yes, go ahead. I think we need a mic.
My name is Murray. It is on? Okay.
Yes.
My name is Murray Tushimina from the DRC. I have one quick question and one request. You mentioned a lot of things, but you are looking at a room full of mature butterfly. So we're no longer the metamorphosis state. And you mentioned something about industries. Unfortunately, our industries in Africa are now represented by the youth because it's full of Mr. Smith, Benson, Van der Berg, or whatever. So as a head of state, how would you change that you really use the human capital that you have within your country? And my request is this. You managed to convene a summit, Afro-American summit in the United States. Would you be kind enough to convene another one, a Pan-African leaders versus the youth that you see here, so we can actually continue the discussion about how you would handle the baton to some of us that are ready to take over the continent.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Can we get a microphone here at the front? There's one to your right, yes. Is it turned on? Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, all of you. My name is Alec Muhoho. I am based in Rwanda, Attitude Builders International. Your Excellency, thank you for your inspiring speech. I would like to ask a question that you mentioned about industry and infrastructure. And His Excellency, the President of Rwanda, yesterday mentioned about mindset change. I would want to know, you mentioned about the ideological problems in Africa. If this ideological problems is still a problem, because people in Africa are a bit tired of every time we are having the same old stories, same old conflicts that seem not to be ending, but on the other hand, there is a development. So, Your Excellency, are you optimistic that we are moving on the right, as Africa as a continent, are we on the right direction in changing our mindset or addressing the issue of the ideology? Thank you once again.
Thank you. Yes, and a final question there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Herin from Kenya. I just want to say I'm excited at your speech, especially given that you've taken us to some of the core issues that we need to focus on, things like research, because I think beyond all the other talks, we have to equip ourselves to compete globally. And my persuasion is that as a leader, at that level, if we can take that talk and sustain that conversation, that we can have presidents inspiring young people to be able to focus on the sciences, even as they do the other disciplines, because I think that's part of the gap, and it's because they have not been hearing people in high places persuade them to look into that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, please.
And Pan-Africanism, are they the same thing? Now, of course, they are not the same thing, but they are linked. Liberation, because the countries were colonized, they were broken up into colonies. 54 of them. Uganda was under the British. Kenya was under the British. Congo was under the Belgians, and so on. So in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe was under the settlers, white settlers. South Africa was under the white settlers. Mozambique was under the Portuguese. Angola was under the Portuguese. So when we were fighting, we had to fight the local colonialist. You had to have the liberation movement according to the local situation there. But although this is a long topic, we don't have time. But we succeeded because we coordinated. We coordinated not only among ourselves, but even with the people from Asia. That's why, for instance, China was supporting us, supporting our anti-colonial struggle. The Soviet Union was supporting us. So although the liberation movements were different according to each country, but there was coordination among us. And the mistake was that after liberation, we did not continue the coordination. We sort of relaxed. That's why the problem was. They are not the same, but they are linked. The young lady from DRC, she also talked of metamorphosis. I don't mean you metamorphosing now. Individually, I mean the social metamorphosis, the society. Society must metamorphose. We must, for instance, when my father sent me to school, now all the people in my family have gone to school. I think my father was the last traditional person. We are all now middle-class people. That's what I mean. I mean the social metamorphosis of society, not just you metamorphosing from youth to mother and all that. That's a micro metamorphosis, but I'm talking about the societal metamorphosis. Now, but she also talked about the industries manned by foreigners. I think you should be very careful. I wish I had my chat here. I normally, I don't use the computer, but I like to use the blackboard. You see, first of all, before you quarrel about who is managing which industry, you must first of all look at the size of our economy. How many industries are there? In Uganda, there's a group called the Uganda Manufacturers Association. Sometimes they invite me for their dinner. But when I was last there, I asked them, I said, how many members do you have here? They said they had 700 members, meaning manufacturers. If you go to United Kingdom, there's what they call the British Confederation of Industries. When I went there, I asked them, I said, how many members do you have? They told me they had 55,000 members. Now, that represents, each one of those represents a factory. Now, before you quarrel about who is manning factory A, factory B, let's first solve the question of bringing in as many factories as possible, as many factories, as many hotels, as many as possible. That's how China has managed, by the way. When you hear that China has grown, it has attracted a lot of these external money. Yes, you can put there some, once you are attractive, once people are rushing to come to your, by dealing with the roads, dealing with the electricity, dealing with the railway, your country becomes attractive. People start rushing there to come, and because they want to make profit. And when they come, you can put conditions for them. Say, okay, you employ more Ugandans now. So that instead of having too many whites, you have more. But this comes later. The first thing is to make yourself attractive so that you attract people to come in, and also you retain your own people. But I would want to caution, don't start quarreling about the who before you solve the what. What is to be done? Now, the mindset change. Somebody said, do we still have, there are two issues. One is ideological confusion. The one I talked about of, for instance, why are there sectarian conflicts? These sectarian conflicts are wrong because, as I described, they are not correct. But even if you solve the sectarian conflicts, then there's another problem of mindset. Let me give the example of Uganda. Uganda now has got a population of 37 million people. Now, if you assume that there are 5 people in each family, that should mean that there are 7 million families, at least. 7 million plus. Now, many of these families have land. Uganda has got very good land, very fertile. They have land. But if you go to the registrar of companies, somebody who registers companies, if you start a company, you go and register it. You go there and you ask him, how many companies have you registered? When I last checked, he had registered 160,000 companies. Now, that means that's much less than 1 million. That means many of the families have not started any business. They're just there. They have land, but they have not studied a business of how to use the land to make money. Now, that's the mindset change we are talking about. In French, there's what they call, I learned a few French words about 52 years ago. Now, one of the words I liked most was dole meal. Dole meal. Is it dole meal? Dole, yeah. Now, many people in Uganda are definitely dole meal. And this is the mindset change I think President Kagame was talking about. There are the ideological problems, but even where there are no ideological problems, there are mindset problems. To know that in a modern society, you need food. What do they call food in French? Okay, let's say chakula. But you also need money. You also need money. And how can you use your assets to generate money? Many of the families in Uganda are still there. And it's a struggle. We are talking about it. According to the census of 2002, only 32% of the homesteads in Uganda were in the money economy. The other 68% were in what they call subsistence economy. How do they say this in French? Subsistence economy. Huh?
Subsistance.
Agriculture, subsistence economy, agriculture.
Subsistance, right? Économie de subsistance.
Huh?
Économie de subsistance.
Agriculture, subsistence, agriculture.
Agriculture de subsistance.
Uh-huh. When you go back to your country, this is the biggest disease. How many people in your country are in agriculture because that means they are not part of the modern economy. And they are a burden to themselves, but also to the country, because they are not producing. And yet they want services. They want medical care. They want roads. So where do they come from if you are not part of the production? That means they are depending on the 32% are the ones producing for this 68%. The other ones are dole meal. Uh-huh. So, are we on the right direction? Africa is not uniform. In some areas, performance is good. Like in Southern Africa, there is now there are no wars in Southern Africa. In 1970, there were a lot of wars in Southern Africa, in Mozambique, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Angola. But now these wars have shifted. They are no longer, Southern Africa is peaceful, except Madagascar, the one which had some problems some time ago. These wars have now shifted to other parts of Africa. So it is a mixed story. There is progress, but there are also problems. I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And now I'd like to turn it over to the chairperson of Umurinzi, Eddie Sebera, for some final thoughts before we end this session.
Thank you once again, Mr. President, for giving us this opportunity to have you here with us and discuss about Africa, the challenges, the issues that we face as a youth, but also the future that we believe could be of what we think Africa could be if we put more of our contribution toward different policies that will be implemented in the future. However, looking at the discussion we had in the last 2 days, we had some great ideas, good interaction, and which came from different parts of Africa, from the discussion we had with the participant here. On my side, I have one request. As one of the head of state we have today here with us, is to ask you, since we talked about the issues, the problems that we face, and we believe that we could bring some contribution. So now the next question that I have in mind is, and I even asked and shared with our colleagues here, is what next? Yes, we as the youth, we pledged to go to the next level, which is trying to implement what we've discussed here. But we need this audience, this kind of interaction and conference to be ongoing. So the request is, please allow us to have the next session in your country as the host, and we will be very grateful for that. Thank you.
I forgot to respond to that. You will be most welcome to come to Uganda, and we shall host this meeting. That's one point, so you'll be most welcome. And I like the youth, because when we started our activities, we were young, just like you. I started being active when I was just 18, actually. When I was 18 years old, that's when I started being active. Much of the work, we did it when we were young. So I'm very happy to see you taking interest. That's already a very good sign, and we shall definitely welcome you to Uganda. Our minister is not here, but the Minister of the Youth. There is an elderly minister who is here, of Foreign Affairs. But we shall follow it up very much. We welcome you. Now, earlier on, somebody had asked me, had said that he heard that I was the one who asked Obama to call the Africa USA meeting. It's true that I have been advising the American presidents to call this meeting. I talked to President Bush Jr. when he was there, and later on I talked to some of the Mr. Obama's people. Because we had had the same meeting with China, you know, we had had a summit with China. We have had several summits with Japan, 5 of them, TICAD, called TICAD. We have had several summits with the European Union, and we even had a summit with Turkey, Africa with Turkey. We had a summit with India, Afro-India Summit, and with the European Union, we have had a number of them. And you know, there are 44 million relatives of yours in the United States. Do you know those relatives? Even Obama is one of them. So, I didn't see why we should not link up with these people of ours. Unfortunately, the African Union now has created the 6th region. There are now 6 regions in the African Union. And the 6th region is the diaspora, the African diaspora. These are the black people in the United States, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Brazil. That Brazil you are watching on the television is full of black people. I don't know how many there are. There are very many there. So, yes, the American government sometimes does their own thing, but we have our people there. So it's important that we see how to link up with them. And this was one way. If you have the whole summit and we are all there, we can see how to work together. It is true that I suggested it. I'm not the one who called it, but I have been telling them. But we should continue with our own summits. We don't have to worry about the Obama summits. Those are additional. These ones are more important. These are ours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's been a real pleasure having you here. Would everybody like to join me in another round of applause? Mr. President, thank you.